Hi, I'm Paul Walsh, the founder of Metacert, recording this video from my mum's house. I don't actually live here, but I'm recording it after listening to a Radio 1 interview about the sender ID verification in Ireland, which is failing miserably right now, and predictably so. So here's the situation. In Ireland, the regulator has rolled out a sender ID verification, which enforces every organisation in the country to have their identity verified, so that their branded phone number appears inside people's phones when they receive an SMS text message. And if they don't have their identity verified, their number is replaced with a scam likely label. And everyone is obsessed right now in the media talking about the number of false positives, the number of organizations that are being labeled as scam likely when they shouldn't be. And that's a very important problem to be obsessed with. But I have a second problem that's even bigger and worse, which I'll come on to in just a moment. But I'll address the first one, which is the false positives. What's happening is this. Hospitals are not seeing their messages being delivered to customers without disruption. Their very important appointment reminders are being labeled as scam likely, so a lot of patients are going to ignore them. And when those scam likely messages end up in their junk folder, they'll probably never see another message from their hospital again. The same's happening with lawyers, dentists, doctors, barbers. In fact, my best friend's son, who's a very good friend of mine, Kyle, his barber is suffering because he didn't know he should get his identity verified. Even if every organization in the country knew they should have their identity verified, we've seen from history that it doesn't happen overnight, and sometimes it doesn't happen at all. If you remember back to the website identity verification, the padlock inside the browser. Today, there's no label inside a browser to tell you if the domain owner, the website owner, had its identity verified or not. Because in 2019, all the browsers removed those labels because most people didn't know the difference between a website that had its identity verified and a website that just had an encryption certificate. So a different color padlock. And it wasn't because the identity verification process was broken. It's because the labels were broken. They were never implemented properly and people weren't conditioned to look at the right kind of label. You can't force people. You can't force the most vulnerable people. I've been studying the human behavior of criminals and their victims, and the software they use, the time, and the marketing, and the tools, and the conditions for decades. And I've helped to create open standards around URL classification. I even co-invented the entire concept of classifying and labeling user accounts on the internet that people take for granted, like Twitter verified. Although I would argue that those implementations aren't particularly good, but the concept of itself. So I've been studying this for a very long time. And I've consulted, well, informally, Comreg, unfortunately, because I didn't have time to do it formally. So they weren't able to act upon my advice. Instead, they're listening to people who don't have the right expertise and the right experience. They might work for security companies, but they're security companies that don't have any insight whatsoever to SMS infrastructure and services. And then in the telecom world, they don't have any experience or expertise in cybersecurity, much less phishing and social engineering, online impersonation. So there's very few people who actually live at the intersection. I just happen to have worked for 4 mobile operators and implemented quite a lot of SMS infrastructure, and now run a security company that specializes in anti-phishing and social engineering. So social engineering being the manipulation of people on the internet to encourage them to do something they'd rather not do. So back to the sender ID verification real quick. There's a lot of organizations right now that are seeing their messages being labeled as scam likely, which means people are going to start ignoring that label scam likely because they're going to realize it doesn't really mean anything, because a lot of legitimate messages have that label, which means they'll probably trust some dangerous messages that are labeled as scam likely. Now here's the worst problem. Now the false positives, by the way, that will never be addressed. They might improve it and we might see more organizations have their identity verified, but history has shown us that it's always going to be a problem. It's not going to go away. There's always going to be companies and service providers that don't seek verification. Oh, and by the way, that's because a lot of companies don't use reputable marketing service providers. And it's because they don't know any different. They'll just Google cheap SMS marketing or text alerts. and they'll get an abundance of service providers. And those providers don't use legitimate means to send messages. They don't pay the operators a fraction of a penny for every text message that's sent and received. Instead, they'll bundle in regular SIM cards with unlimited texting so that their customers can have as many text messages as they want, almost free of charge for them, because it's like €20 a month per SIM card. But here's the biggest problem. Most fraudsters, scammers, criminals use regular SIM cards, regular phone numbers to send text messages. One of the CEOs of a leading mobile operator in Ireland told me personally that they almost fell for an unpussed SMS scam. And when I asked, they said, yeah, it came from a regular number. It didn't come from a branded number. So if the CEO of a mobile operator can easily fall, or anybody for that matter at that level, can fall for an SMS scam from a regular number, do we honestly think the most vulnerable in society are going to do any different? No, they're not. Now, here's the biggest problem, and this is the most important problem that nobody is talking about in the media. Nobody's talking about this as a stakeholder. And this is not technical. This is human behavior. This is psychology. By telling everybody, avoid text messages that are labeled as scam likely, we automatically condition them to trust messages that aren't labeled as scam likely. Obviously, if I say to my mum or my aunt or uncle who aren't exactly tech savvy, if I say to them, oh, don't trust any messages that are labeled as scam likely, and I don't say anything else, then obviously they're going to trust messages that aren't labeled as that. And because scammers are already doing it, and they've been doing it for years, and they've been doing it in every country in the world, including countries where sender ID verification has failed to stop this problem. In the UK and the US, sender ID verification has been in place for years, and SMS fraud is surging in both of those countries. It doesn't stop scammers. It might stop criminals from impersonating banks and brands, but that doesn't really matter as much if people are going to fall for scams that come from regular numbers, and now they're more likely to fall for fraud. And what amplifies this problem is that in October, Comreg has said they're going to block every message that isn't verified from a business service. So they won't be labeled as scam likely. They just will never be received. So patients will never receive their important appointment about the cancer treatment that they need to make. And then also what's happening in October, which most people don't realize, is that under PSD3, I think it is, it's a new EU regulation. It's been coming in we've been waiting for it for a few years, but in October 2025, every bank in the EU, including all the Irish banks, will be mandated to support instant transactions. That means everybody in Ireland will be able to send and receive money in less than 10 seconds, faster than a lot of crypto exchanges, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. When the banks are closed, people will be opening fake SMS text messages that look legitimate, requesting the transfer of funds. And when those transfers are made in less than 10 seconds, the money can't be recouped. Banks are going to get hit hard in Ireland. This is not a wild prediction. This is based on expert insights, unique insights, years of experience, and it should be obvious by now to everybody based on history how this plays out. But I do feel for the banks, because their exposure to risk and liability is going to increase massively when SMS fraud continues to rise, if not get even worse because of the new labelling system in Ireland. And customers are going to want to get their money back, because banks will be forced to act proactively to protect people, which they can't. It's almost impossible to protect people from SMS scams with today's technology. It needs a new radical approach. So stay safe out there. Thank you for getting this far. My name is Paul Walsh. I'm the founder of MetaCert. We do happen to have a radically new approach to this problem, but this video isn't about that. It is just about the problem that I'm seeing today.